Spirituality and politics seems like an oxymoron to some folks, but actually these are inseparable realities. And today we're going to have an opportunity to explore just how they interact on this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson in behalf of the Austin Area Interreligious Ministries, bidding you welcome to this edition of the show. Religion and spirituality and politics. Some people say that these are like oil and water, they just don't mix. But the reality is that they are inseparable. We've heard a lot recently about the proposed tax-supported faith-based social services. But beyond that, there are many other aspects of it that, particularly as persons are serving in public office and they have to have their faith guide them in how they function in that capacity and the decisions that they make. We are privileged today to have someone who served in public office here in the state of Texas, Sherry Greenberg, who was a representative to the House of Representatives until the last session. Sherry, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much.
And I heard you at Seton Cove give this presentation on spirituality and politics, which inspired me to ask you to come on the show today.
I'm delighted to be here.
And I think folks, as they look in, knowing that you were in the House of Representatives for how many years was it?
10 years.
Okay. And what was there in your faith tradition that led you even to run for office in the first place?
When I first ran for office, I would commonly get a question that went something along the line of, what's a nice girl like you doing a thing like this for? And I always said that I put the blame squarely at the feet of my parents. And hand in hand with that, my faith and my upbringing. I grew up in Oklahoma until I was 17, I'll admit that, in a Reform Jewish family, but a very traditional family. Every Friday night we had dinner at my grandparents', Sabbath or Shabbat dinner. And as a matter of fact, when I was in high school, my dates would have to come to my grandparents on Friday night to get me. But at these Shabbat, Sabbath dinners, we always had lively discussions. And although no one in my family had ever been involved in politics, all business people, I was also brought up through my faith and my family to believe that I should contribute to the community. And I think it was that feeling of contributing to the community that really ultimately brought me to serve in the Texas legislature.
Well, now people contribute to the community by doing volunteers with the Scouts or the United Way or things like that. Politics seems like a whole different experience. What led you in that particular direction?
It is a different experience, and in fact, my background is in public finance. Although I had been involved in a lot of community activities and in politics solely as a volunteer, you're right, I never had planned on running for office. But it was a time in my life and a time in Texas where we were having, as we may again, significant budgetary problems. I had a background in finance and it seemed that for me, it was the type of way in which I could really contribute as far as public service. There had been various times when people had mentioned to me running for other offices such as school board. Right. And for instance, I didn't feel that I was qualified. At that time, my eldest child was about a year and a half old. I was involved in starting a child development center, but I knew nothing about the public schools. I wasn't a teacher, I'd never been in PTA, and I felt that I wasn't qualified. And I said, you know, I really don't have any desire to just be in public office. But I've often said that I feel like at the state level of government is where you can do the greatest good for people or the most harm to them.
So without having served in Austin in any other official capacity, you ran for the House of Representatives, and what year was it?
That would have been 1990.
Okay.
I was actually elected. The general election was November 1990, and then my first session was January of 1991, 10 years ago, a redistricting year, just as we have now.
Right. And then your last year to serve would have been in 1999.
2 years ago, yes.
Okay, well, during that 10-year period, you had opportunity to feel the pressures, to feel the kind of experiences that I would wonder if you ever thought in terms of how your faith was making a difference and how you made those decisions and how you dealt with those pressures.
Yes, I would say it did in a number of ways. First of all, in my faith, in Reform Judaism, we don't have, I guess, the same concept of an afterlife, of life after death, of heaven and hell.
Okay.
I grew up in my synagogue being taught that what you do here and now matters. And that you will have your afterlife will be in the way that you are remembered, so that you will carry on through the good deeds that occurred during your life. And that's something that I really believe in and believe deeply, that what we do here and now really matters, and how we affect the lives of those around us is critical. Also, I would say that my faith has been very family-oriented, very strong family. I talked about the Friday night dinners and the extended family. And so I think that was very important. I'm married, have 2 children, one of whom was born while I was serving in office. The other was a toddler when I started serving.
I see.
And so people would say, well, how do you deal with this? And I said, well, it's very simple. When I leave the legislature, I have a life, and I think that's important, and I have a family. And that's what's important to me when I leave the legislature. And I really feel that it's very important for anyone in public service to have that sense of family and of spirituality. I think that if you ignore your family, then you are obviously out of touch with, to me, what's important in your life, with yourself, and really with those around you and with the people whom you're trying to serve.
Okay. Now, I've heard you say a couple of things. One is that you were, from the standpoint of your Jewish faith, that the life after has to do with the influence that you have, that what you leave behind you, that continues to be in the lives of people. So that public service, and the legislature in this case, was one way in which you expressed conviction.
Right.
And that you also said that when you left the legislature, you had a life still.
Right.
Your persona as a public figure was not identical exactly to who you were as a person, that you had this life in your family and these other aspects of your being.
That's very true.
And so those are a couple of ways that your spirituality impacted your participation in the public sector.
Yes, very much so. And I would also say that certainly I think we have to draw on our inner strengths when times are tough or you have tough decisions before you. And I think that it also helped me at times like that to have the inner strength to draw on what I was taught growing up. You remember religious school classes. You remember, at least I did, various teachers, sermons. I think all of that for me, is a part of who I am, and you draw on those things.
Can you think of any examples during your 10 years that you were in the Texas House of Representatives? You had a tough issue, you had something that you had particularly to draw on from that faith resource. Is there anything that comes to mind that you can recall?
I don't know that I would say just one issue in particular, because honestly there were quite a few.
Sure.
And I think that my general philosophy always was, and I think this is part of my faith too, the Reformed Judaism is a faith where you are taught to question. You discuss and you question and you analyze. And so my philosophy always was, I want to hear all the facts and all the sides of an issue, and I'm going to question and analyze. And then when I've completed that, I'm going to have to based on that information, do what I think is right. And I would tell people, we're not always going to agree, but I hope that you will understand that I've asked the questions in good faith, and in the end, then I've done what I truly believe morally, ethically is right.
Okay, so the integrity aspect of your public service, where you were, as much as you could, not doing it for special interest purposes, but for
Correct.
what you thought was a public interest.
Right.
Well, I think that that's encouraging to folks to hear, because there's a lot of cynicism out there about politics. Everybody's in it for something.
Oh, I know there is.
What would you say to people who are looking in that said, it's just so corrupt as to be not even making any difference, that we can make any difference with this system?
Well, of course I would say that's not true, and I say it all the time. When groups ask me to come and speak to them, for instance, maybe it's a charitable group and they want to go up and talk to legislators, and they ask me, how do I go about this? The first thing I tell them is that your voice matters, that you think that legislators receive thousands of calls and letters, and a legislator might on a subject that's very contentious, maybe school finance, but most of the time that's not true. And I also tell them, you want to make sure that your voice is heard. You don't want your representative to only hear from what I call the vocal minority,
Right.
just a few people. So
Well,
it does matter.
What happened in Florida in the last presidential election should be a case study for everybody, that your vote counts and matters.
Your vote counts, and your voice counts too. Your opinions matter.
Okay. You know what matters also? That is that we are asked to take a break in the middle of this show. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, I think that's fine.
But we are going to come back in just a moment on this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue as we talk about spirituality and politics. Stay with us. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we are talking with Sherry Greenberg, who served in the House of Representatives for 10 years, representing an area here in Austin, and as she is helping us to reflect upon spirituality and politics. Sherry, as we come back to your service in the legislature, I remember reading in the newspaper at the time that you had raised a point about invocations in the House, if not the Senate, where people were coming in and saying these prayers. Ministers were saying very sectarian kinds of prayers. And you were raising a question about that. And can you just kind of review that
Sure.
for us?
Actually, I didn't raise the question. a reporter from the Statesman posed the question to me.
I see.
Yes. And it was a particular morning when we had a very full house, and I don't mean just the legislators, but the gallery was packed, absolutely packed. And the invocation was not non-sectarian. In other words, the invocation was a very Christian invocation. And I realized that up in the gallery, among all the many, many people, in fact, was a class of students, one of many classes of students. This happened to be a class that my son was in. And I knew that it was an extremely diverse class, I knew of at least one child in the class who was Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic. And so when the reporter posed the question to me, I said that I felt that an invocation in the Texas legislature should be non-sectarian, that it should be of a general nature and not be based on one particular religion. And I felt that way, and still do very strongly, because those of us who serve in the legislature really feel that it is the people's house. The House of Representatives is a people's house. For instance, you'll notice that when you go to the Capitol, we don't have those machines to go through and metal detectors, and we don't lock the doors, because this is the people's capital. And we're a very diverse state. We have people of all faiths, of all races, of all nationalities, and we certainly did. And we have children visiting of all.
So the implication is that if you're a clergyman, you go in there, clergy person, and offer a prayer, it should be one that is that can speak to all people,
yes,
and not be just assumption that you're laying your religious convictions on others.
Exactly.
And I know there are guidelines for this.
Yes,
there are national guidelines.
There are national guidelines. There is a pamphlet specifically on this subject that has been around for a long time. It is published by a national interfaith group.
Okay. You know, the other thing that brings to mind is this current proposal that the Bush administration has put forward for faith-based, tax-supported social services. And I've been interested to see that in the wake of that, there's controversy now that
oh, yes,
you've got, you know, is this tax money that's going to be going to such a variety in our pluralistic society, whether it's black Muslims or Hare Krishna or Scientologists, or the ones that are considered to be, you know, not what has been traditionally the recipients of any tax-supported,
right,
either federal or state. What's your view on that?
It's caused, as you said, a great controversy from people of all different beliefs, and it's been very interesting. And it's caused controversy from people who are on very different sides of the political spectrum too. And I think that's because of the very official nature that is being described here of an office of faith-based. First of all, you would have to somehow define what is a faith. And I think that's a big problem. Next, I think, given the separation of church and state that is important in our country, you would have to make sure that there was no proselytizing in return for services. In other words, that you would not receive the social service unless you were praying in a certain way. Next, there are some faith-based groups that don't even want to participate because they don't want to be regulated, which I can understand. But on the other hand, if your money as a taxpayer is being utilized, you want to make sure that certain standards are being observed, whether it's recipients getting job training or mental health services, so on and so forth. However, that isn't to say that we don't have a role for faith-based organizations, because that's very much a part of the mix for social services in our country and has been for a long time.
I mean, hasn't Catholic Charities, for instance, been
Absolutely.
a recipient of federal
Absolutely.
and state
Catholic
funds?
Charities have, hospitals have, social service providers.
So how can you draw the line now?
Well, First of all, there are existing laws that pertain to that allow, for instance, faith-based organizations to bid on contracts, and then they are evaluated according to the same criteria as everyone else as far as the services that will be provided.
I see.
So that's a way that has been utilized for a number of years.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see because
Yes, it will.
it brings out the fact that this is not just a Judeo-Christian country anymore. This is a country where there are more Muslims than there are Presbyterians. I mean, it's that sort of thing. And,
Very pluralistic society.
and I think that means that if there is going to continue to be interaction between public institutions, government institutions, and religious institutions, those guidelines are going to have to be past the muster of the Supreme Court, if nothing else.
It would seem that way. And as I said, it's a very controversial subject for people of all different beliefs, both religious and on the political spectrum.
You're watching the Texas State Legislature in session now.
Yes, I am.
Do you have any feelings about what's going on now?
It would be hard not to after 10 years, and particularly since the committee I chaired, Pensions and Investments, dealt a lot with monetary issues, state investments, the teachers' retirement system and their investments, teacher health care, state employee issues. And I also spent the last 2 years chairing the Select Committee on Teacher Health Insurance, which of course is a very big issue after redistricting in this particular session, an issue that I definitely believe needs to be addressed. We have a teacher shortage in this state.
Okay. So how does this bear on the fact that in the last legislature, it's been nationally reported that Texas had a tax cut of $1 billion the last time around,
And the session before that.
and the session before that. So are the chickens coming home to roost, as it were, that with the less of the revenue that had been during the times of plenty, now in the times of scarcity, we're beginning to feel that pinch. Is that true?
Well, yes, I think so, because that's $2 billion that is gone as far as budget considerations forever. Also, we're seeing some slowing in the economy. We're continue to have population growth for various reasons. We're having a growth in Medicaid roles, issues like that. We have prison guards that are not paid what they should be, I believe, and you can look at the national standards even on that. State employees who are falling behind, the teacher health insurance, and I guess from my viewpoint, my background is finance, and I believe that when you have money, when you're in a situation like that, it should be invested. And I don't know that we did that. If my constituents had actually known that they received a tax cut, it would have been different. But I was hard-pressed to find anyone who received a tax cut or knew that they received one or that found it more than enough to take the family to McDonald's one time. I think from a fiscal standpoint, better to invest, to put it in a rainy day fund, invest in the future of your children by making sure that the teachers have adequate pay and health insurance so that we won't have a teacher shortage.
So when you were talking about the teachers before and the fact that there is a shortage of teachers, you can see that as having a direct connection to the fact that the tax cuts were made the last couple of sessions, that there's less now for education?
Well, the current debate is not whether or not we should have teacher health insurance. There seems to be very widespread agreement on that, but whether or not we're going to have the money to do the job.
To fund it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think that if you were going back to the idea of how, you were making those decisions before, did you vote for the tax cuts?
I think I voted for, and I'd actually have to go back and look. I don't know that I voted for the last one. I may have voted for the final version. I know I didn't vote for the preliminary version, but I'd actually, to tell you the truth, I'd have to go back and look at all my votes.
One of the things, talk about spirituality and politics, I think is inseparable from taxes. Justice Holmes made the statement that taxes are the price that we pay for civilization. And if politicians are in the mindset of saying, look, cutting taxes is the most important thing that any public official can do, and not say, you know, we have these investments to make, and taxes are the means by which we make this society even more civil and so on. I mean, to me, there's a lot of spirituality connected to where people come out on taxes.
There could be, and as I said, there's also, I think, just sound fiscal planning.
Yeah.
The times of plenty cannot last forever. To have money in a rainy day fund, I believe, is a good idea.
Yeah. Kind of like Joseph and the 7
Yes,
years of plenty,
that's
saving up for
right.
the 7 years of want. You can get biblical about that.
You can.
What about Passover? We're coming up within a week of the beginning of Passover, and one of the things that's occurred to me is how political Passover is. I mean, it was
Yes.
a liberation movement
Absolutely.
from bondage.
From slavery.
Yeah.
Yes. It was certainly. You had a group of people, as you said, escaping from bondage, from slavery. It was a liberation. And I think it is good that we celebrate that liberation, that it calls to our minds, particularly in this country, how fortunate we are to be in a land where we have the freedoms now, in this day and age, that we do. Not all people did at all times in our country, of course. So I think it's very important when you reflect upon individual liberties and civil rights, and there are certainly lessons that are as true today as ever.
Well, now, in celebrating Passover, your annual event where you recall all of that,
Right.
Has it been your experience that it's looked on mostly as people's individual spiritual life, or do you see it within your family or within the temple where you go, a recognition this has public implications for us?
Oh, I think that it is both personal and public. My temple, for years, has had on the second night of Passover what's called a Seder, which is the dinner celebration that is open to the public. Many of us have people in our homes who are not of the Jewish faith who are very interested in the Passover Seder and in the story of liberation.
Mm-hmm. So by having guests in,
Yes.
you share what the significance of that was, not only for the people then, but for the people today.
That's correct. And even in recent years, I know that there have been some churches in Austin that have had Passover Seders. I've had people come to me asking for materials, for recipes even.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you for coming and sharing that
You're
today,
welcome.
all of this. And Sherry Greenberg, you're a real public servant still.
Thank you.
And thank you, folks, for watching. I'm Richard Thompson, on behalf of Austin Area Metropolitan Ministries, bidding you peace. Be with us again next week.